Ponto event, a strategic compass for the European Union, what next for EU defense and security. Thank you all for participating and discussing with us at this evening. My name is Niklas Hintermeyer. I'm a Ponto member. Before we get into the topic, let me briefly introduce our think tank. Ponto is a grassroots think tank established and primarily based in Vienna that translates scientific findings for the general public, thereby acting as a bridge between civil society and policymakers. We bring ideas, analysis, and solutions of our generation into the political discourse through various tools, so to say, publications, and kinds of event discussions. In this context, I would also like to make a special mention of Ponto members Helena Hahn and Elke Schreik, with whom we have organized and set up this event today, and who will, together with Kara Thielen from Polis 180 in Berlin, will moderate the following breakout sessions. So let's get started with the topic for today. With the adoption of the strategic compass at the Foreign Affairs Council at the end of March this year, the EU has paved the way for a new approach to security, defense, and crisis management. EU member states have agreed on a common strategic vision for a stronger role in security and defense, and have committed to a set of concrete objectives to achieve this goal in the upcoming 5 to 10 years. These objectives range from a development of an EU rapid deployment capacity to the creation of an EU hybrid toolbox and further strengthening of the EU cyber defense policy. The timing of the adoption of the strategic compass is significant, given that the EU is faced with several complex geopolitical challenges at this moment, from the impacts of the Ukraine war to tensions in the European Union-NATO relationship, and from shifts in EU crisis management and civilian operations to the needs to boost EU's resilience to cyber threats and disinformation. The EU has many priorities to juggle. So many questions that arise from these topics. How can the strategic compass help guide a transformation to a more coherent common security and defense policy? And will the European Union live up to the expectation of establishing itself as a more robust and stronger geopolitical security actor? And finally, considering member states' different interests at times, what challenges might lay ahead? In the next step, I would like to welcome our experts tonight and thank you very much for participating in the willingness to discuss with us today. I would like to start with Paul van Hoofd, who will give his 5 minutes input statement. Paul van Hoofd is a senior strategic analyst and the co-chair of the Initiative of the Future of Transatlantic Relations at the Hague Center of Strategic Studies. And among other things, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Security Studies program of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So thank you, Paul, very much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Niklas, for the invitation. So I'll just take 5 minutes to discuss what the vision could be for a European security order and how that relates to Compass. So I think the EU strategic compass, I went over it again this afternoon and highlighted things that I that I thought I agreed with, that I thought were particularly important. There was a lot of them. There is an emphasis on space, on the weakness of space capabilities and the need for situational awareness. There's focusing on cyber and hybrid threats. The need to coordinate the fragmented defense industries, the arms producer market of the European Union, to make sure that there are less systems, more kind of streamlined productions, more streamlined needs. There's a clear emphasis on, or one of the emphases is on military mobility, so the ability to quickly deploy forces through Europe, maybe to the periphery. There's a mention of the interdependence between producers and how that can be weaponized. There's an overall sense of, I think, seriousness, at least necessitated by developments in the last 5 or 10 years, but specifically, of course, the current war, There's points in there about maritime security, about protecting the maritime approaches to Europe. There is indeed a lot in there. And that's on one hand, that's good. I think compared to previous EU documents where there was a lot, well, where there was also a lot in there, but not necessarily always very concrete. But at the same time, to have a long list of things, of topics to cover, of things that are all to some extent priorities, is not really a strategy, right? It's not really a vision. I was also looked at this afternoon, I looked at a few commentators on the Compass when it came out. Because when it came out, I read it, but I was traveling in the US. I only got back a few days ago, still slightly jet lagged. But I sort of just caught up on the commentators. And most of them noted, well, it has this, but it could have also put in this, it could have also put in something else, it could have put in a lot more things. So that is not necessarily a strategy, right? It's not necessarily a vision that says, this is our primary problem or primary set of problems, and these are our primary set of solutions. And to accomplish this, we need to invest in X, Y, Z. That's not, I think, the vision that comes out of there. It comes out of them, I guess, to a greater degree than in previous iterations of EU's so-called strategic documents, but it still does not really do that. And there are certain points in there, like the EU rapid deployment capacity. I'd rather write down the name because I keep forgetting the endless variations of these kind of things. But I remember 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate and the Helsinki headline goals were being, in place for a few years, and they were looking at and this seemed like to me very much the solution at the time for some of Europe's security problems. And then it took a long time to get it together and basically never really was used. And that was a much more ambitious goal than EU rapid deployment capacity. So if this is a compass, I mean, this is a bit of a lame joke, but if this is a compass, which direction is it really pointing, right? It's kind of a compass that is close to a magnetic field. It's kind of twisting every direction at once. So there's a lot in there, and there's a lot in there that's interesting and good, and paragraph by paragraph, page by page, it makes a lot of sense. But I'm still kind of wondering, also based on past experience with what the EU does, how much of this will be translated into real policy, right? Because there's enough in there that everyone, with all the variations that there is in the EU, in terms of strategic cultures, in terms of real sense of geographic threats and urgencies, every state can find things in there that they can, latch onto and kind of probably safely still dodge the rest. And I think that has always been the case. And to some point, that's unavoidable. But that does give me a sense of problem. It gives me a sense of that something's not entirely okay. What should that urgency be about? Well, and then I'm going to give my interpretation of what I think is somewhat missing, and that is a real sense of where the EU will be left in a few years. So I think, despite all the current closeness between the US and Europe, I don't think that the war in Ukraine will, in the medium to long term, keep the US away from shifting towards the Indo-Pacific. I'm not just saying that for no reason. I think what was very telling is that the US National Defense Strategy, which was published about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, emphasized that China was the primary threat in US foreign policy planning, and that Russia was clearly a secondary threat. That was published, with weeks into the war, so they could have still changed it if they wanted to, but they didn't. Right? It says the real focus is on Asia. The Ukraine war will end at some point. And also telling, maybe even a little bit less foundational, but also quite telling, is that in the week that the war started, Secretary Blinken went on a tour around the Indo-Pacific and said, well, to local allies and partners, said, well, look, this is not going to be whatever happens, it's not going to distract us from really focusing on China and the Indo-Pacific. So I think that is something to keep in mind. I think also the point will be that Russia should be the primary core of all planning here. That is the biggest threat, whether it's a direct military threat or the indirect hybrid threat. And I think it will arrive, however this war exactly ends, will arrive at a world where Russia will be significantly weakened in a conventional military sense, but it will also be more dangerous. It will have less to lose. It would also have less bargaining chips. I don't know what, it's disappointing that the energy policies of the EU are shifting so slowly, but I can't imagine that it will not shift more and more, which means that Russia will have less leverage in the energy markets. With its conventional military destroyed, it will also have less leverage there, which will mean it become more of a state that really hits hard on the nuclear dimension. So I'm going to wrap it up really quick now. We can talk more about this in separate panels, but I think so one of the long-term goals should be to make sure that Russia is and remains significantly militarily weakened, that it does not recapture its military potential. And I think a lot can be done by weaponizing the tech dependencies that Russia has. I'm saying that really quickly, but I could talk more about that. And I think that for the EU, whether it's through NATO, which looks to get to probably add a few more members, which also through NATO looks like, if Stoltenberg's remarks today are properly understood, it seems that we're going to give up on the idea of tripwire forces in the East, but we're going to move to a standard forward deployment. So whether that will mean in the long run, if the US wants to move to the Pacific, that we'll start seeing a Europeanization of NATO, or that the EU starts taking on that role. In any case, that should be, I think, this kind of the core of what the European security order will really depend upon. And then you can translate it into other capabilities. And some of the more, let's say, crisis management tasks, the out-of-area operations, in Africa and the Middle East, will probably not be as important to that. The maritime approaches might be. Anyway, but I have a very traditional way of thinking about this. What's the greatest challenge to this? And I think that's very much on the political will attached to it. So all these EU documents, all these iterations, all of them are perfectly fine, but then actual progress is always very slow. It's kind of redundant almost to say, because I guess we all know this. And I would really suspect that this time it will be not as gradual and not as incremental as before, but it's probably still going to be too slow for a world that is now is changing, and everybody recognizes that, but it's not changing as slowly as it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago. It's now really rapidly changing, and the consequences of missing or not preparing for that change are much more disastrous. So I think a lot of it will depend on a very kind of wealthy core of Western European states, so that there'll be I would include Austria in Western Europe, I guess, although Cold War sense it doesn't really. But Europe, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, like really wealthy states that are going to have to either catch up to this and put some serious willpower, some serious muscle into this, or else just risk leaving Europe kind of some flotsam jetsam floating around as the geopolitical currents kind of shift again. And by wrapping it up like that, I kind of brought it back to the whole notion of a compass at some metaphorical level, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Paul. We're looking forward to your breakout session. And next one is Tanya Latizzi. She's a policy officer in the Security and Defense Policy Division at the European External Action Service. In parallel, Tanya is an associate fellow with the Egmont Roll Institute for International Relations in the Europe and the World program. So thank you, Tanya, for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. I think I'll provide a much more optimistic view of the compass, if you allow me, not just because it's my job, but because I really, really believe it. So I want to, set a very solid basis for what exactly is the compass, what is it going to, what we want to achieve with it, and why exactly it matters, why it matters for us, why it matters for our partners as well. You set a very good scene, Niklas, and you as well, Paul, of course, in terms of what it is. So it's clearly a strategic document. It has, I think you said it as well, 60 plus concrete goals and actions. It has a clear timeline, and it has this shared threat assessment, the shared vision, I would even argue, even though Paul said to the contrary. I think it does provide a shared strategic vision for what exactly the EU is looking at in terms of threats and challenges, and how exactly it has to adapt to be able to respond to them. And the reason why this time is different is because now we have something that we call a threat analysis, which may sound very basic, like, yeah, it's a threat analysis, seems like something that's pretty normal, that's what think tanks do all the time, but it's a first for the EU. And it's a first because it's the first time the EU has done this as an intelligence-based product. So this has allowed us to set a very objective scene in terms of characterizing our, if you will, security and defense landscape in terms of the threats and challenges that we face. And that's the first time we have done this. So we don't have a political threat analysis, we have an objective intel-based one. Now, why does the compass matter? Well, first of all, it's a unique document that it's distinguishable from any other security and defense document that the EU has had in three main ways, I think. First of all, it has the highest level of political ownership that any document of this kind has had. It has been not just, approved, but it has been properly adopted by 27 foreign ministers, 27 defense ministers, and it has been endorsed at the highest political level, what we call Chefsache, right? At the European Council level, heads of state and government. So this is the highest level of political ownership such a document can have. And because it is so concrete, because it has all of these different actions that are followed by concrete timelines for delivery, this gives us, as the EU, a lot of ammunition, if you will, and ammunition to point fingers at member states and to record how progress is being met or not met in a very concrete manner. And we haven't had something like this before. Now, why does it matter for our partners? I think it's an important question that I'm happy to address in the breakout session. I think, first of all, it consolidates very clearly the EU's ambition to be a stronger security and defense sector in all of these different areas, in how we can act better together in crisis management, and how we can be better at securing, listing all the different chapters now, securing our access to what we call contested strategic spaces. My colleague Temo will speak more about that because he's the master there. We look at how not only we have to spend more, but how we have to spend better. And we look at how to become better partners. And this is where I want to come. So they are all very much interrelated, and all of them together, if you will, bring together the EU's ambition to become a better partner for the US, for NATO, for the African Union, for all our other strategic partners. I think it also very much gives a very concrete and ambitious political mandate for the EU to be able to pursue much deeper and much more strategic relationships with its partners. And I'm happy to go more into that in the breakout session. So I know we're a bit behind time, so I will leave it at that, just hopefully to set the tone for that and to dig into the details in the smaller sessions.
Thank you very much. Sounds perfect, Tanya. And next we would like to welcome Alex Walsh. He's Program Manager at International Security Sector Advisory Team at the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, and he works on advisory, field support, and the knowledge and outreach portfolio. So thank you, Alex, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you as well to Paul for his comments, and also to Tanya. I work in Geneva. We're often known as DCAF. You might have heard of us under that name. I've been working on stabilization and security sector reform programs, mostly in the Middle East, particularly in Lebanon and Jordan, for about 10 years. So I am here to give a perspective or ask questions about the strategic compass kind of from Middle East and North Africa point of view. DCAF has got a lot of programs going on in the Middle East, North Africa. We've got offices in Tunisia and Beirut, and a presence in Palestine. So we, as DCAF, work to support the development of security sectors around the world that are well governed. And that means that they function to protect their citizens. And that means that they have accountability built in, and accountability for violations, as well as just poor performance. So DCAF, the EU is one of our partners, and we work on implementing SSR programs, which are funded by the EU. And we also provide advice, evidence, lessons, and recommendations. So the EU is quite an important partnership for us. Now, more specifically, the CSDP, for very obvious reasons, is a very important area of cooperation between the EU and DCAF. The CSDP works on the rule of law, civil administration, police and security sector reform, and crisis areas. We all know that quotation. So, wheeling back around to the strategic compass, as both of the previous speakers have noted, the strategic compass goes quite far beyond previous EU security and defense policies and strategies. Now, as I read it, someone whose background is in the Middle East, this is a very, very high-level document, and so I think that it creates possibilities rather than certainties. And then for this reason, I guess I try to arrange my comments here around questions rather than conclusions. And I'm really pleased to see that we have some EU representatives with us who might be able to answer some of those questions partially. Now, perhaps Tanya and Paul disagree on this, which is the first question is, we've got this very inspiring document, but how far will the EU go on sort of fulfilling this in terms of funding and political support through the lifetime of the compass, right? Let's take some more specific examples. The compass mentions the reinforcement of the CSDP missions, 3 of which are in the MENA region, and those 3 are all civilian ones rather than military ones. So the compass acknowledges the challenges that we've known about for quite some time, but does it provide any particular direction for meeting those challenges? We know that we know, and the Council of the European Union knows, that one of the ongoing needs is strengthening those missions' situational awareness. So that's their analysis, it's their understanding of the political economy, and it's understanding how, tricky challenges like non-state actors and hybrid security sectors work, and how disinformation and information manipulation affects the security sector. So we know that, and this is my second question is, how might the strategic compass move us on along that along that path for the CSDP missions becoming more analytical, more sort of analytically acute? The next question, I guess, is, what skills and processes does that actually require? The compass also says that there's a need for operational coordination between the CSDP missions and logistical support and intelligence sharing, even joint medical evacuation capacities between the CSDP missions, which is a very important commitment. But where should we go with this? Where does perhaps it's implicit somewhere in the compass, but I would like to understand, where do we go with this? And finally, my last set of questions is back in 2018, when the CSDP compact, which I'm sure is a document we all know and love, reflected on the progress of the missions. It noted that there would be a need for improving the human resources commitment from the member states, and not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of the proportion of those human resources who are coming actually as seconded civil servants, so not freelancers, but coming from the foreign ministry or the military of a member state. This is still an issue, and I guess if listening to Tanya and the amount of optimism that she has, and the comments that she made on the commitment, the fact that this is an adoption by foreign ministers, that sounds to me quite an optimistic statement. And so I wonder, when we turn back to human resources, what might that mean for that particular challenge? So again, this is a very high level document. It does mention Middle East and the neighborhoods in a few places, but at the moment, for me, what we have is possibilities and questions around these shared analysis capabilities, the operational coordination, and the human resourcing. And I'd love to hear people's perspectives on those. And I will wrap it up there.
Perfect. Many thanks, Alex. So we'll have the time for discussing all these questions like in a minute. And I would also like to welcome and thank you for your time, Temi Tamiku. He works as a policy officer focusing on countering hybrid threats in the Security and Defense Policy Directorate of the European External Action Service, and among other things, is adjunct professor of political science at the University of Tampere in Finland. So Temu, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank also Paul and Alex for your very timely questions, very good questions regarding this. And I would like to continue from where Tanya was speaking. I share her optimism, not just because of the work that I share with her in the same directorate, but also because I, in many ways, believe in this this paper, and I've been participating on this compass drafting in relation to countering hybrid threats, which is one of the key deliverables in the whole compass paper. First of all, I would like to say a few words of the context that we are dealing with now, focusing on the hybrid threats more specifically. That as the President of the Commission said in her State of the Union speech last year, she talked about the hyper competitiveness or this changing world dynamics in global politics, and increased economic competition, technological competition, and also about interdependencies. And this is the world that we live in, and this is one of the parts that the EU hybrid toolbox that we propose in the strategic compass is trying to address, because it has created certain vulnerabilities that didn't exist there just a short while ago. We have faced, for example, intent or attacks on electoral systems. We have faced cyber attacks targeting banks, for example, and we have faced migration used as an instrument to weaken us, and many different other types of hybrid means to target the European Union. So what do we have here in order to respond to this kind of threats? I would like to say that the EU has already a lot of existing powers and a lot of potential power. The EU is an economic superpower. The EU is a normative superpower. EU may not be the security superpower or defense superpower, but there's still a lot of potential. What the strategic compass is trying to harness a bit more efficiently. So what do we need here, and why do we propose the EU hybrid toolbox? For example, if we look at one of the biggest cases regarding hybrid threats from last year, the Belarus case, the use of migration targeting the EU and its member states. The EU was actually relatively fast and efficient in responding to this threat. The EU used a lot of its existing powers, like diplomatic powers, its outreach to the origin of these people that came through Belarus, and It addressed the delegations there. You used strategic communication. You used also the visa regimes. You used the leverage on aviation, for example. So competencies from the Commission and also from the External Action Service. But what was remarkable in this response, that it was kind of an ad hoc response, to be honest. The EU used the ICPR, the Integrated Political Crisis Response Tool, which is meant for crisis situations. And that was the way that the EU was able to use these different competencies in a fast manner. But not all the hybrid cases are crises, and we don't want them to become crises. We want to be able to answer in a similar manner when it's not a crisis yet, to prevent the crisis. And that is exactly where we need the hybrid toolbox. We need it to be more flexible and more efficient. And what to do in order to be more efficient or more flexible? First of all, we need a concept or definition of hybrid threat that remains relatively flexible, because the threat landscape is changing, it's evolving. What we're facing today or tomorrow might be something different in 5 years' time. So if we have too rigid definition, we might actually limit or tie our own hands for the future. So that's one part of being flexible. And we need also to have this flexibility in choosing the right tools. So we need to have tailor-made responses for every case. And for that, we need both the competencies of the Commission, the internal tools, and also the external tools, the common foreign and security policy tools. And that is what the EU hybrid toolbox aims to do. It will bring together under one same umbrella and decision-making mechanism the existing tools that are there and also the ones that we are still developing. Like, for example, the foreign information manipulation and interference toolbox, which is also mentioned in the compass. And what do we need to be more efficient? We need to address the situational awareness, improve our ability to connect the dots, to see what's really happening in this kind of a cross-domain hybrid attacks, hybrid campaigns. And we need to improve the decision-making mechanisms as such. As I said, we have a mechanism for crisis situations, but we don't have yet a mechanism for normal decision-making. And we need to have exercises to test this decision-making mechanism whenever we agree on or the member state agree on the mechanism to make it more efficient. And we need to have a follow-up on each cases. We need to learn from using the toolbox whenever we have it. Only by that we can really have this kind of a more coordinated, more coherent response to any type of hybrid influencing. And yeah, that is my sales speech, but I feel kind of a salesman, and because I'm not completely impartial on this topic, but I'm glad to explain a little bit more in the breakout sessions. Thank you, and hand over to Niklas.
Yeah, thank you, Timo, for your sales speech. It was very interesting, definitely. Okay, thank you very much for all the input statements. In the next step, we can go into the breakout session. So for all the participants, you're going to be assigned to those breakout sessions that you have signed up for. And I think, Julius, are you ready to go into the breakout sessions? Okay, perfect. So we're going to meet each other like in 35 minutes again in the plenary, and then we're going to have some key issues that we're going to raise or discuss in the framework of reflections, and then we're going to wrap up the discussion. So looking forward to the breakout sessions and have fun.